Why the department tasked with rooting out corruption has itself been called a combat zone. This is BBC World News.
The Democratic Republic of Congo. It should be one of the richest countries in the world. A nation the size of Western Europe, its soil gives up precious minerals on a massive scale. Millions of pounds of gold are mined here every year. When you buy gold jewellery on the high street, there's a chance it comes from here. But only about 10% is legally exported. The rest is smuggled out. Gold is Congo's curse. Since 1998, over 4 million people have died here. During Congo's years of conflict, these goldfields changed hands many times. Rival militia fought vicious battles to control its wealth. It was here I met Liki Likambo, a miners' leader who stayed in the area during the militia's murderous reign.
People suffered a lot here in Mongboalu because of these militias. There was gold here in this mine, gold, kilos and kilos of gold, and it was used to buy weapons. Yes, there were people killed, victims that were murdered especially because of the forced labour here.
Liki told me how one of the militia groups, known to have committed acts of cannibalism, executed one of their enemies.
When they caught the man, they took him to the militia and called everyone to a meeting. They said that this guy had caused a lot of trouble and killed a lot of militia fighters. They did it before the eyes of everyone. It's the first time I've seen anyone beheaded.
Thousands of men, women and children were killed. If ever there was a time and a place for the United Nations, this was it. Enter the blue helmets and the white jeeps. Soon 17,000 troops were stationed here, the UN's biggest peacekeeping operation anywhere. They helped disarm the warring factions, ran elections and brought some peace and stability. But there was another side to the story which brings nothing but shame to their reputation and will add to calls for reform of the UN itself. In the east of the country, I met a local activist monitoring human rights abuses who welcomed the UN's presence. In 2005, at an isolated airfield, Joel Bisubu stumbled across something suspicious, which made him question his faith in the peacekeepers.
When I arrived at Mongboalu Airport, I saw the trader, who we used to call the fat trader. When he arrived at the airport in the jeep, he was protected by some Pakistani soldiers and Pakistani officers.
The Indian businessman he described as the fat trader was known to be involved in smuggling gold. Joel secretly took photographs of him on his mobile phone.
This is the Indian businessman who was implicated in illegal gold trafficking. We tried to understand what he was doing, why he was with the Pakistanis and what he was doing in Mongboalu.
Joel later discovered the gold traffickers were flying into Mongboalu on UN aircraft, that they were protected by UN soldiers during their visit, and had even stayed at the UN base while organising their illegal trade. Joel passed this information to Annika van Woudenberg, an investigator for Human Rights Watch in the Congo.
We discovered that the Pakistani peacekeepers in the town had been involved in a mafia network to smuggle gold out of Mongboalu. So Human Rights Watch collected documents, we interviewed people, we put it all together in a file for the UN and handed it over to them days after we first came across the allegations. We thought that this was important and that the UN needed to take action.
When the UN started investigating, they came across even more serious claims. We've spoken to investigators involved. They told me that as well as being implicated in the illegal gold trade, there was evidence the peacekeepers had given weapons to the militia. It's an amazing allegation. One of the most important tasks of the UN in the Congo was to help disarm the rebel groups. That the very peacekeepers sent to disarm the militia were in fact secretly returning weapons could not be more serious. Anecha Baby, who I met not far from the mines, claimed the peacekeepers had supplied the militia with ammunition.
It was a very big box, about this size, the kind that carries ammunition. The commanders, these were Dragon Masasi and Kung Fu Nyinga, took a vehicle to meet and negotiate with a Pakistani officer. They went in and came back with 7 boxes of ammunition. After receiving these boxes, all the militia, including my young brothers, took their arms to go and attack the Congolese army.
So who were the militia leaders with the colourful nom de guerre? They were military leaders of a group called the FNI.
The FNI and Dragon and Kung Fu in particular are of course some of the most murderous individuals that operate in eastern Congo. The FNI have been responsible for atrocities including sexual violence, the killing of thousands of people on an ethnic basis in northeastern Congo. They are one of the most murderous armed groups, and any interactions that supports them, arms them or provides them with business opportunities undermines the peace.
The United Nations was set up in 1945 with the ultimate mission statement to prevent conflict, uphold human rights and bring peace and security to the world. From its headquarters in New York, it controls 100,000 peacekeeping troops in more countries than ever before, 8 in Africa alone. It helped end Liberia's murderous civil war, guided Cambodia to recovery and eradicated the scourge of smallpox. But in recent years, the UN's image has been tarnished.
Some United Nations peacekeepers and aid workers are routinely demanding sex from young girls.
Peacekeepers in Cambodia sexually abuse local girls.
Peacekeepers in the field have been exposed in a series of sex scandals. UN officials at the highest levels have been convicted of corruption. Paddy Ashdown says he witnessed peacekeeping at its worst in Bosnia.
I watched a battalion of Ukrainian blue-helmeted UN soldiers in the middle of the siege of Sarajevo, in which 10,000 were killed and people were starving to death inside the ring of the siege, running brothels, cigarette smuggling operations, and taking out of this impoverished, destitute, starving city when they left something like 600,000 Deutschmarks. But the damage that is done in Sarajevo, in the Congo, in Liberia, by the low-level daily corruption to the thing the UN is trying to do and to its reputation on the street is catastrophic.
And manna from heaven for the UN's critics, many of them here in the States who want to radically change the way it's run and funded. Controversial Bush appointee John Bolton says members are in denial.
We conducted 2 public meetings on sexual abuse and trafficking by UN peacekeepers and on procurement fraud in UN peacekeeping operations. And both of these hearings by the Security Council were protested by the Group of 77, the group of developing countries, and they're afraid that every rock they turn over will lead to more rocks being turned over, more changes being made. So there's a very powerful self-protective force at work in the UN.
The Office of Internal Oversight Services is the UN's watchdog. Its investigations division has responsibility for looking into allegations of wrongdoing. What was your impression of their ability to investigate themselves?
Well, I think it was very limited. I think there's a culture at the UN that doesn't like the scrutiny from inside or outside the organization. I think in terms of real hard investigation into misfeasance or corruption, the UN is just not that interested.
Not interested or just no good. Every year the UN spends billions of dollars in support of its missions worldwide. It's a lucrative business for the lucky companies who get the contracts. It used to be Edwin Nazilio's job to keep those contracts clean. When he discovered a problem with an Indian company who'd won a contract worth $27 million, he went to work.
We had a lot of problems, and one of them had to do with the technicians that were supplied by the Indian company. By contract, the Indian company was supposed to pay them a daily subsistence allowance of $143. They were not paying that. There was no satisfactory explanation why that money was not reaching the technicians.
What Edwin discovered was that the workers were forced to sleep on the ground and were not getting any food because their allowance was being kept by the company. The man responsible for the contract was Sanjaya Bahel, a senior UN official responsible for doing deals worth millions of dollars.
The moment Sanjay Bahel found out that I was auditing that contract, he started secretly communicating with my supervisors in New York, basically questioning my motives and asking whether the audit should be performed of that contract.
What Edwin didn't know was that Bahel was a close friend of the agent for the company Edwin was investigating, Nishan Kohli. Despite Edwin's concerns, there was never a proper investigation.
The problem I had was that in the oversight services did not stick with me. They actually sided with Bahel against me to try and kill the audit or kill the report.
But in 2004, the relationship between the agent and the official was almost exposed when a whistleblower spotted irregularities in the contracts. An investigation followed. The result? This letter from Bahel's boss stating the investigators found no substance in the allegations and recommends that Mr. Bahel be cleared of all allegations. But within the UN, some senior officials were concerned that this was a whitewash. According to a secret report written last year and obtained by Panorama,
it became clear that cases involving fraud and corruption in procurement services were not being properly investigated, if investigated at all.
It went on to say that cases were often unilaterally closed. In 2006, a new task force was set up to investigate allegations of corruption within the organisation's multi-billion-pound purchasing operation. Bob Appleton, a former US prosecutor, runs it. And top of Appleton's list to reinvestigate.
Well, the Bahel case landed on my lap in March of 2007, and when you're a procurement official, a UN, international public servant, you're supposed to be acting objectively, pristinely, and fairly. Bahel corrupted the process by favoring the company, acting as the company's de facto agent in the procurement process.
The task force proved that Bahel had accepted bribes from Nishan Kohli, the agent for the Indian company.
He gained a personal benefit from his actions, namely below market rates and a very valuable piece of real estate in Midtown Manhattan.
A luxury apartment in this block overlooking the UN is what Bahel got as his payoff. But Bahel was not the only UN official Kohli was trying to bribe. While Bahel got an apartment for his colleagues, Kohli had other sweeteners in mind. Kohli pleaded guilty and gave evidence for the prosecution. He told the court he treated other UN officials to nights on the town, complete with strippers and escorts. It cost him $6,000. This month, Bahel was sentenced to 8 years in prison. But why did it take so long to catch him?
There had been a previous audit and previous claims made that there was something amiss, and ultimately that had not been acted on. And certainly now, looking back on it, I mean, the complaints and criticisms that were raised at the time were very valid.
Now vindicated, Edwin is not surprised it took 8 years to get a conviction.
You come back to the old question of culture. So anytime you find wrongdoing, potentially you are rocking the boat. There is this cultural thing that sort of says, but if that comes out in the open, it creates a problem for us, so just keep it hidden.
But now the truth is coming out. More and more contracts, some involving British firms, are being investigated.
We started with about 400 cases. We have still close to 300 pending, of which 20 to 30 are large, significant value contracts that exceed $1 million US.
One of the first stops for the task force was in the capital of Congo, Kinshasa.
This internal report obtained by Panorama reveals widespread and inherent corruption throughout the procurement department here in Kinshasa. If you wanted a contract, you had to pay a bribe.
2 months ago, Alan Doss took up his post as head of MONUC, the UN mission to the Congo.
Any form of corruption will undermine our reputation. This is why we had a whole team come down, why 5 people have been summarily dismissed. In UN terms, that's pretty strong.
But despite the UN's oversight services being warned 4 times about corruption in Kinshasa, it wasn't until last year that action was taken.
During the investigation, it emerged that one official was allowed to remain in his job despite allegations of corruption dating back 20 years.